Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today I wanted to share with you another of my favorite books, which is a work of fictional history. It is The Scottish Chiefs by Jane Porter. This book was originally written in 1809 by a Scottish author, Jane Porter, and she and her sisters wrote several works during that period, and an interesting side note is that they actually accused Sir Walter Scott of somewhat plagiarizing them, which is an interesting topic. There was no copyright laws at the time, and especially as female authors, they really had no legal recourse to take against Sir Walter Scott, and so it is not a proven accusation, but it is an interesting debate that surrounds these works. So the first version I read was this one of the Scribner illustrated versions of the Scottish Chiefs. It has color plate illustrations in it, which make it extra enjoyable reading. However, then, after I had fallen so in love with it, I realized that it was an abridged version, and so then I had to search very diligently for a while before I was able to locate an unabridged version of the novel. So then I believe I found them on eBay, I don't exactly remember, but I found these 1891 printing of the entire novel. So I was very excited because I love it very, very much. It is, again, written in the romantic style of writing, so it is idealized, as in the characters who are intended to portray heroic, pure, noble values. They are not necessarily portrayed in a way that is extremely multifaceted. However, again, like I said in my video about the novel Norwood, if you appreciate the writing for those values and character traits that they are trying to acclaim through their writing, then you can appreciate more what they're trying to do in their work rather than look for realistic portrayals of humanity with all their dark sides and their good sides. So this book tells the story of Sir William Wallace, who was a Scottish chieftain who led Scottish clans against the English in the 1300s. It is a fictionalized work of history, so the major events are, for the most part, historically accurate. She did condense the time frame a bit, as well as added a couple characters who are not founded in history, including the Lady Helen and Edwin Ruthven. However, they are some of my favorite characters in the book, so you can enjoy them even if they're not strictly historically accurate, at least as far as is discoverable. Of course, that history was quite a long time ago, so nobody can prove for certain that there wasn't such characters. I will read the opening of chapter 1. The war which had desolated Scotland was now at an end. Ambition seemed satiated, and the vanquished, after passing under the yoke of their enemy, concluded they might wear their chains in peace. Such were the hopes of those Scottish noblemen, who, early in the spring of 1296, signed the bond of submission to a ruthless conqueror, purchasing life at the price of all that makes life estimable, liberty and honor. Prior to this act of vassalage, Edward I of England had entered Scotland at the head of an immense army. He seized Berwick by stratagem, laid the country in ashes, and on the field of Dunbar forced the king and his nobles to acknowledge him their liege lord. While the courts of Edward, or of his representatives, were crowded by the humble Scots, the spirit of one brave man remained unsubdued, disgusted alike at the facility with which the sovereign of a warlike nation could resign his people and his crown, into the hands of a treacherous invader, and at the pusillanimity of the nobles who could ratify such a sacrifice, William Wallace retired to the glen of Ellerslie. Withdrawn from the world, he hoped to avoid the sight of oppressions he could not redress, and the endurance of injuries beyond his power to avenge. Checked at the opening of life in the career of glory that was his passion, secluded in the bloom of manhood from the social haunts of men, he repressed the eager aspirations of his mind, and strove to acquire that resignation to inevitable evils which could alone reconcile him to forego the promises of his youth, and enable him to view with patience a humiliation of Scotland which blighted her honour, menaced her existence, and consigned her sons to degradation or obscurity. The latter was the choice of Wallace. Too noble to bend his spirit to the usurper, too honest to affect submission, he resigned himself to the only way left of maintaining the independence of a true Scot, and giving up the world at once. All the ambitions of youth were extinguished in his breast, since nothing was preserved in his country to sanctify their fires. Scotland seemed proud of her chains. Not to share in such debasement seemed all that was now in his power, and within the shades of Ellerslie he found a retreat and a home, whose sweets beguiled him of every care, and made him sometimes forget the wrongs of his country in the tranquil enjoyments of wedded love. During the happy months of the preceding autumn, while Scotland was yet free, and the path of honourable distinction lay open before her young nobility, Wallace married Marian Braidfoot, the beautiful heiress of Lamington. Of the same age and brought up from childhood together, reciprocal affection grew with their growth, and sympathy of taste, virtues, and mutual tenderness made them so entirely one, that when at the age of 22 the enraptured lover was allowed to pledge that faith, publicly at the altar which he had so often vowed to his Marian in secret, he clasped her to his heart and softly whispered, "Dearer than life, part of my being now and forever, blessed in this union that mingles thy soul with mine, to all eternity." Edward's invasion of Scotland broke in upon their innocent joys. Wallace threw aside the wedding garment for the cuirass and the sword, but he was not permitted to use either. Scotland submitted to her enemies, and he had no alternative but to bow to her oppressors, or to become an exile from man amid the deep glens of his country. I'm now going to read another excerpt from a little bit later, which is taking place in Bothwell Castle, part of the Scots loyal to Wallace. Helen threw her arms about her father's neck, and thanking him tenderly, with a beating heart retired to prosecute her plans. Moray, who met her in the anteroom, informed her that 50 men, the sturdiest of the glen, awaited her orders, and Helen, telling her cousin of the Earl's approval, took the sacred banner in her hand and proceeded to the gallery in the hall. The moment she appeared, a shout of joy bade her welcome. She waved her hand in token of silence, and smiling, with a benignity that spoke her angel errand, "My brave friend," said she, "I thank you with the ardour with which this night's enterprise you assist me to pay the everlasting tribute that is due to the man who has preserved me the blessing of so good a father." "And to us, noble lady," cried they, "the most generous of chiefs." "With that spirit, then," returned she, "I address you with greater confidence. Who amongst you will shrink from following the standard to the field of glory? Who will refuse to make himself the especial guardian of the life of Sir William Wallace, and who, in the moment of peril, will not stand by him to the last?" "None are here," cried a young man, advancing before his fellows, "who would not gladly die in his defence." "We swear it," burst from every lip at once. She bowed her head and said, "Return from Ellerslie tomorrow with the bier of its sainted mistress. I will then bestow upon every man in this band a war bonnet, plumed with my colours. This banner will lead you to the side of Wallace. In the shock of battle look at its golden ensign, and remember that God not only armeth the patriot's hand, but shieldeth his heart. In this faith be ye the bucklers which heaven sends to guard the life of Wallace, and so honoured exult in your station, and expect the future gratitude of Scotland." "Wallace and Lady Helen, to death or liberty!" was the animated response to this exhortation, and smiling and kissing her hand to them in token of thanks, she retired in the midst of their acclamations. Moray, ready armed for his expedition, met her at the door. Restored to his usual vivacity by the spirit-moving emotions which the present scenes awakened in his heart, he forgot the horrors of contention in the glory of victory, and giving her a gay salutation, led her back to her apartments, where the English soldier awaited her commands. Lady Helen with a gentle grace acknowledged her obligations to the sovereign for their acquiescence. "Lands in Mar shall be yours," added she, "or a post of honour in the little army the Earl is now going to raise. Speak but the word, and you shall find, worthy Englishman, that neither a Scotsman nor his daughter knows what it is to be ungrateful." The blood mounted into the soldier's cheek. "I thank you, fairest lady, for this generous offer, but as I am an Englishman, I dare not accept it. My arms are due to my own country, and whether I am tied to it by lands and possessions, or have not but my English blood and my oath to my king to bind me, still I should be equally unwarranted in breaking those bonds. I left Heselrigge because he dishonoured my country, and for me to forswear her would be to make myself infamous. Hence, all I ask is, that after I have this night obeyed your gracious commands, the Earl of Mar will allow me to depart for the nearest port." Lady Helen replied that she revered his sentiments too sincerely to insult them by persuasions to the contrary, and taking a diamond clasp from her bosom, she put it into his hand. "Wear that in remembrance of your virtue, and of Helen Mar's gratitude." And this is another later section in which the Scottish clans are gathering in the Highlands for their advance against the English outposts on the border of Scotland and England. In the cool of the evening, while the young chieftain was thus employed, Kenneth entered and told him Sir William Wallace had called out his little army to see its strength and numbers. Edwin's soul had become not more enamoured of the panoply of war than of the generous smiles of his admired leader, and at this intelligence he threw his plaid over his brigantine, and placing a swan-plumed bonnet on his brows, hastened forth to meet his general. The heights of Kirkconnell echoed with thronging footsteps, and a glittering light seemed issuing from her woods as the rays of the descending sun glanced on the arms of her assembling warriors. The 30 followers of Moray appeared, just as the 200 of Frasers entered from an opening in the rocks. Blood mounted into his face as he compared his inferior numbers, and recollected the obligation that they were to repay, and the greater one he was now going to incur. However, he threw on his shoulder the standard worked by Helen, and turning to Wallace, "Behold," said he, pointing to his men, "the poor man's might. It is great, for it is my all." "Great indeed, brave Moray," returned Wallace, "for it brings me a host in yourself." "I will not disgrace my standard," said he, lowering the banner-staff to Wallace. He started when he saw the flowing lock, which he could not help recognizing. "This is my betrothed," continued Moray in a gayer tone. "I have sworn to take her, for better for worse, and I pledge you my troth, nothing but death shall part us." Wallace grasped his hand. "And I pledge you mine, that the head whence it grew shall be laid low before I suffer so generous a defender to be separated, dead or alive, from the standard." His eyes glanced at the impress. "Thou art right," continued he. "God doth indeed arm thee, and in the strength of a righteous cause thou goest with the confidence of success to embrace victory as a bride." "No, I am only the bridegroom's man," returned Moray, gaily moving off. "I shall be content with a kiss or two from the handmaids, and leave the lady for my general." "Happy, happy youth," said Wallace to himself, as his eye pursued the fragile footsteps of the young chieftain. "No conquering affection has yet thrown open thy heart, no deadly injury has lacerated it with wounds incurable. Patriotism is a virgin passion in thy breast, and innocence and joy wait upon her." "We muster just 500 men," said Kerr to Wallace, "but they are all as stout in heart as condition, and ready even tonight, if you will it, to commence their march." "No," replied Wallace, "we must not overstrain the generous spirit. Let them rest tonight, and tomorrow's dawn shall light us through the forest." Kerr, who acted as henchman to Wallace, now returned to the ranks to give the word, and they all marched forward. Sir Alexander Scrymgeour, with his golden standard charged with the Lion of Scotland, led the van. Wallace raised his bonnet from his head as it drew near. Scrymgeour lowered the staff. Wallace threw up his outstretched hand at this action, but the knight not understanding him, he stepped forward. "Sir Alexander Scrymgeour," said he, "that standard must not bow to me. It represents the royalty of Scotland, before which we fight for her liberties. If virtue yet dwell in the house of the valiant St. David, some of his offspring will hear of this day, and lead it forward to conquest and to a crown. Till such an honour, let not that standard bend to any man." Wallace fell back as he spoke, and Scrymgeour, bowing his head in sign of acquiescence, marched on. Sir Roger Kirkpatrick, at the head of his well-appointed Highlanders, next advanced. His blood-red banner streamed to the air, and as it bent to Wallace, he saw that the indignant knight had adopted the device of the hardy King Achius, with a fiercer motto, touch and I pierce. That man, thought Wallace as he passed along, carries a relentless sword in his very eye. The men of Lochdoin, a strong, tall, and well-armed body, marched on, and gave place to the advancing corps of Bothwell. The eye of Wallace felt as if turning from gloom and horror to the cheerful light of day when it fell on the bright and ingenuous face of Moray. Kenneth with his troops followed, and the youthful Edwin, like Cupid in arms, closed the procession. Being drawn up in line, their chief, fully satisfied, advanced towards them, and expressing his sentiments of the patriotism which brought them into the field, informed them of his intended march. He then turned to Stephen Ireland. "The sun has now set," said he, "and before dark you must conduct the families of my worthy Lanark men to the protection of Sir John Scott. It is time that age, infancy, and female weakness should cease their wanderings with us. Tonight we bid them adieu, to meet them again in freedom and prosperity." In this unabridged version, too, it has various footnotes throughout that discuss either the historical sources that she got her information from, or give more information about the historical events and the people and the clans that are referenced throughout the book. So it's very well documented of where she got her sources for the historically accurate parts of the story as well. So, whichever version you can get your hands on, whether the abridged version, which is also a very satisfying read in and of itself too, and if you are become a total Scottish Chiefs fanatic like I am, the unabridged version is out there. A little bit difficult to find sometimes because they don't always say if it's abridged or not. If you go to the Hathi Trust digital library, that is HATHI Trust Digital Library, they have the first volume of the unabridged version on there that you can read, and then if there is a look inside feature on a different listing, then you can compare the parts that should be there, or if they're not there. So that's a way to get a hint of whether what you're looking at is the abridged or the unabridged version. So that's Scottish Chiefs, one of my top 3, I would say, favorite novels, along with Norwood, and along with The Last of the Mohicans, which I will talk about in another video.